25 minutes after 8. Yes, welcome back to Salam Media. And this is Friday Night Live with me, ST Safaraz Dakola, your host for the next 30 minutes to go. Thanks, Zakir Daud, for holding it down for the last 30 to 45 minutes. That was on the sports segment, hashtag sports with Zakir Daud, right here on Friday Night Live. Now it's time for hashtag CARTalk. And tonight's topic is South Africa ready for electric cars. We're talking to the MD at Grid Cars, Winston Gordan, a bit later on in the program in a few minutes or so. We're going to chat to him a bit about this whole concept. Now, I've been to the Free State in Durban, Cape Town a number of times, and if you've traveled also, you'd see along the N1 or the N3 respectively. I seen one at a Cecil garage, this little black electric thing standing there. It looks like a pump, and it's got an active charge port, and it's got Jaguar branding on it. And I was quite intrigued by that. And to see this type of demand in the country, so the network has been laid out. We're going to talk to him a bit about regards to the demand for such vehicles. How does this fare in South Africa? What's the dynamic of the SA market and the African market when it comes to electric cars? Now, as the effects of global warming have become more obvious, and the world is becoming more aware and they're more conscious of the environment, consumers are choosing products that either positively affect the environment or, if nothing else, have minimal or negative impacts on the environment. Okay. Now, the changing consciousness has seen some incredible inventions. One of those most noteworthy is being the EV, the electric vehicle, right? Let's go back maybe 15 years ago. We'd think that self-driving and cars would be, I think of a near future as such, right? Who would have thought we could have that now? And this is the now, when electric cars are available, self-driving and self-drive capable vehicles are available in the market respectively. All right. So China is setting the ambition and the target to increase electric vehicle sales, to curb the problem with pollution, and some European countries are vowing to all be electric by the year 2040. So in another 20 years, they plan to be all electric. What are some of your thoughts? We welcome our listeners on various platforms and viewers respectively alike. If you've just tuned in, it's 26 minutes after 8. And also to our listeners out in KZN on the FM airwaves of Radio Al Ansar in Durban and Pietermaritzburg on the frequencies of 90.4 FM and 105.6 FM respectively. Good evening to you wherever you are driving or listening in. Whichever part of Durban or KZN you are in. Right, so the question I'm asking, have you got an electric vehicle and what are some of your experiences with it? Is it user-friendly? Do you feel that, okay, there's enough charge ports available in that regard? So to talk to us a bit more, we welcome Winston Gordan, the MD at Grid Cars. Good evening, Winston. Welcome to Salam Media.
Good evening.
Thanks for taking the time tonight, Winston, and great to have you with us. Right, now first things first, I've been very intrigued by the topic tonight. Is South Africa ready for electric cars? Yes, it's the year 2020. 2010 was a massive year for us. This last decade was massive. Lots of investment growth, negativity also when it comes to lots of certain corruptions and things like that. But in technological advancements, we've seen 4G, we've seen fiber, we've seen 5G. Motor vehicles, we've seen the migration from normal carburetor motors to injection motors. Then we've seen turbocharged motors nowadays. Electric vehicles are here, and they're on SA shores. Grid Cars have built a fantastic network. I've done some research. So I was actually out in Kroonstad one day in the Free State, and I happened to pop up at the Cecil because I mainly sell Cecil diesel, and there's this black box that I look at, and I first thought, maybe it's like an ATM thing or whatever, I wasn't aware, and then I see it's got Jaguar branding on it. This was like a few months ago actually, and I was like, Kroonstad, who is driving? There's not even a Jaguar dealership. I don't even know. But funny enough, that's the N1 route. And I looked at your coverage. You've got over 150 charge points on the active charge network, is what I've noticed. So take us
Yeah.
through firstly grid cars. What exactly is grid cars? Who you are? What are you offering?
Okay, so Grid Cars we specialize in electric vehicle infrastructure, so installing charging stations or selling charging stations. So a lot of our customers would be buying them from us, and we then roll it out at various shopping centers, etc. So I'd actually like to take a step back and just answer your question. You said, is South Africa ready? Absolutely, South Africa is ready. The cars are still relatively expensive, but I think what we've got to understand is this is a move we cannot afford to miss. And when I say we, I mean not just we as South Africa, but we as Africa. And the reason for this is electric cars, the operational cost of an electric car is incredibly cheap. The actual manufacturing of the cars, other than the bodywork and the seats and the windows, that's all going to be the same. But in terms of drivetrain, the actual motor or the engine is a lot simpler and a lot more reliable. So what we're going to see, much lower maintenance vehicles. So vehicles that operate at a lower price and are maintained at a lower price. If Africa doesn't shift, what we could very well see is Africa getting up into a very expensive maintenance operational cycle on a fuel vehicle. So it is really something we have to shift. Right now, there is still a little bit of a premium. But I mean, I'll remind you about cell phones. There was a time where people looked and said, oh, they're too expensive, nobody can afford them. Today you walk past a guy selling sweets on the side of the street with 3 cell phones, not just one. So I think the idea is that the technology will become affordable. We know that it will. And that pivot will probably happen in about 2 years' time, maybe 3 years, if we listen to what the guys are saying internationally. So we should reach price parity on the purchase price of a vehicle within 2 to 3 years. But I promise you at this stage, there's already a business case for people, especially if you're driving 80 to 120 kilometers a day. Then you will then find that you're saving in electricity, or at least in petrol, and rather displaced with electricity is absolutely worth it. You will pay the car off. It'll be worthwhile having a more vehicle, but with a much, much lower running cost. So what Gridcast took the initiative about 2 years ago to start rolling out the infrastructure, because we often heard people talking and saying, oh, it's a catch-22. You're not going to buy the car unless there's infrastructure. And nobody's going to install infrastructure unless there are cars on the road. So we decided, we took a longer-term view of this, and we said, ultimately, we believe that it's going to take 3 or 4 years before it is a busy market and a busy business. But what we then did was we started rolling out some of our own infrastructure. On doing that, a lot of people then started to realize, wait a minute, this is actually worth doing. There is an opportunity here, and suddenly we could start to see a move in the market that people started approaching us and starting to talk about charging infrastructure and charging systems. So from that perspective, it's really been an amazing drive to see how many people have adopted the vehicles and charging infrastructure and charging stations.
I'd like to highlight something. You mentioned, expenses and maintenance cost as opposed to petrol cars. For people who don't know anything or much about electric cars, or even those who might think they know, you clearly are in the know about electronic vehicles. Break down the difference in running cost and maintenance. You mentioned something traveling 60 to 120 km a day. For example, maybe people driving, let's say, from, let's say, the south of Joburg to Midrand, for example, and back. That's 120, 140 km per day. What type of scenario you face cost-wise? Let's say I'm a person who's working in that environment, maybe Midrand or Sandton, wherever, and I'm traveling back to my home. It takes me about 80 k's going, 80 k's coming. If I've got that scenario, what are you looking at? Give me an average to play with so people have an idea.
So let's have a look at, a typical fuel car, you're going to be looking at about R1.50 to R2 a kilometer. Right. That's a reasonable price. That's just for the fuel, not necessarily for the maintenance, etc. I'll touch on that afterwards. So if we look at the equivalent when it comes to electricity, if you are charging at home, so on your normal electricity price at home, you're probably going to be coming in at about a fifth of that price. So you're going to be coming in at around 30 cents a kilometer instead of R1.50 per kilometer. Obviously, there are many ways that we can play with this now, because if you, for example, I've got solar at home. So solar means that my actual charging is quite a bit cheaper. So I might be coming in at 20 or 25 cents a kilometer if I look at my overall cost with the solar system. If you're going to be charging at public charging all the time, then it's going to probably be more like 2/3 of the cost of what petrol would be. So instead of it being R1.50 a kilometer, it's maybe R1 a kilometer. Because obviously the people installing that infrastructure need to recover some money for having paid that capital expense. So we talk about what we call a blended rate. We say that on average, you're going to be using maybe 80% of your charging will be done at home and at work or at other free places, or let's say normal cost places, and about 20% in the public where you'll pay a bit more of a premium. And if you start looking at it like that, your total cost is round about 1/3 to half of what it would be on the fuel price. I did an experiment the other day. I do still have a 5 Series BMW, but I also have an electric car. So I decided to take my 5 Series to work a few days in a row. And all I did was every single day, I filled it up in the morning before I left. And I looked at how much I was paying. And the only thing I was doing is driving the car to Joburg from Pretoria. And it was costing me about 250, 260 Rand a day to fill up the 5 Series. I did exactly the same exercise with the electric vehicle, with the difference that my home, I didn't count the energy because it's at home, but I did count the energy in public at work because I had to charge at a public charging station before I came back. And it worked out to about 40 Rand a day. So if I then add that to that, my home thing, it's going to maybe be 60 or 70 Rand a day. So I could be doing, if I was paying for the electricity at home, and it would be 60 or 70 Rand a day, and the petrol vehicle was 250. So it gives you a real example. And I did that for a whole week in each vehicle to really prove to myself that it is like that. On the maintenance side, and I think this is the part that is a bit more difficult to define, what are the major things that you're going to maintain in your car? Well, let me ask, what are the expensive things you're going to maintain in your car? Probably the brakes. Now, the nice thing about electric vehicles is they use regenerative braking. So they use the motor to do braking, and they put some of that energy back into the battery. So you actually use your brakes a lot less than you would in a fossil fuel vehicle. I can easily go a whole day driving without touching the brake, just using the engine braking the whole time at every stop. The second thing is your most expensive things, and unfortunately I had an experience recently with that where I had to replace a cylinder head gasket. Now, something like that is going to set you back 20, 30,000 Rand. And you don't have things like that with an electric vehicle. So all of those really expensive. The estimates are that it's about 15% of the maintenance cost of a fuel vehicle, if you look at the overall life of all of those sort of things. So I think that's typically what justifies it, is that really you do have a low operational cost on the vehicle.
Very lucrative. I mean, we're looking at Pretoria to Joburg on average about, let's just say, 50 Rand per day minimum, worst case scenario, right? Give or take. You mentioned something about, we were talking about a scenario where if you're traveling 120 k's per day, as opposed to a petrol-powered vehicle, 30 cents per kilometer, opposed to 2.50. So where's this whole misconception that, electric cars maybe expensive and the grid is too expensive for us? And as the general PowerPoint says, now in charge. You mentioned the SA market, meaning in 4 to 5 years is where you've looked at the numbers, right? When you've done your layout. I'm sure a lot of money has been spent on the infrastructure. When it comes to this type of funding, from the government perspective, have they endorsed the concept and this type of business? Are they open to this type of technology and this type of motoring industry? And what's their feedback and response to you?
Yeah, unfortunately not. And, I think in most countries, governments do get heavily involved, and there's good reason why they do that. So if you look at technology, the technology is more expensive now because we're selling a lot fewer cars. You haven't reached scale. You haven't reached all of those numbers that you need to get the price down. And what countries realize is that if they don't promote it locally, and if they don't support it in some way, whether they support the infrastructure or waive taxes on the vehicles or allow the vehicles to drive in the bus lane, these are typical things happening overseas. then what you do is you make it easier for people to make the decision to buy an electric vehicle. And once you can achieve that, you create a local market. When you create a local market, people go to university and they start saying, oh, I want to learn about electric vehicles because I'm aware of what it is. And I think we're missing that in South Africa because with the government, it is expensive. And I appreciate that it is difficult for the government to get involved in things like this because, you know, we're trying to put toilets at schools. And that to me is more important at this stage. So in South Africa, as much as I would really like to see government support of this, I do to an extent understand why they don't. What is harder to understand, though, is why they're not reducing the taxes, because there's actually a higher tax on the electric vehicles than there are on a fossil fuel vehicle. So if you look at a petrol car today, you'll pay 18% tax and then a ad valorem duty, which can be up to 30%. Whereas on an electric vehicle, you pay 25% tax and then the ad valorem on top of that. So it's got a 7% higher tax rate than normal vehicles. And if government would just take that off, that would already make a difference. What a lot of countries are doing is saying, let's waive the taxes on the electric vehicles completely, just for a period, for a couple of years. Let's let the technology get some momentum. Let's get people to realize this is the future. Let's get them to start making decisions that will shift their way of thinking, that will shift their education, people that will shift businesses to say, let me align my business to electric. Let me start driving this. And I think that's what we need in the country, because if we get that, then we'll suddenly get the manufacturing. We'll start to get the downstream manufacturing. We'll get people interested in building battery packs and building the technology that are needed for electric vehicles. So a lot of that will come back from it. We would see economic value. But in order to do that, you've got to take the accelerator off a little bit and say, I'm going to stop some of the taxes in the hope that this industry is going to grow. And I think that's where we've got to see government stepping in and maybe having a little bit of being a bit brave to look and say, I can understand that this is hard, but let's get it going. Let's stop the taxes. Let's see how that industry grows, and let's build a big industry, because this is going to be the next big thing when it comes to technology. And I say big thing. People talk about hydrogen fuel. Yeah, hydrogen is still electric. They talk about autonomous cars. Yep, autonomous cars are best implemented in electric vehicles. They talk about efficient public transport systems. Absolutely, the best public transport system is going to be an electric one. So this is the underpinning technology that we're going to be looking at in transport for certainly the next 20 to 40 years. And I think that's something we've got to find a way to be able to aggressively adopt these ideas and technologies in South Africa.
Highlight you mentioned in 20 years' time. China is setting ambitions quite high. Yes, we know their population is massive. Obviously, you know, with 1.3 to 1.5 billion people, they're increasing their sales targets to curb the problem with pollution. All right. You're saying in about 20 years' time, you're giving us a figure for South Africa to be, you know, to grasp the concept, to endorse it, embrace the whole change, the shift, as how we've done in the last decade with 4G and 5G, etc. Right? I'm giving an analogy. But when it comes to the story about taxes and changing of the mindset, I want to shift the conversation a bit about mindset. How to attract the market. Now, you're partnered up with Jaguar, there's an affiliation, I'm sure. Um, how to, you know, from a marketing perspective, and I'm sure you've got years and wealth of experience in the car industry, bringing this mentality here. How do you change the mindset of a person driving a Hilux diesel buggy, or maybe somebody driving, let's say, you know, a 320 diesel or a 530D and saying, or a Jetta TDI, for example, and then move to electric cars? All these years, we've got this mindset and we've been drilled and trained. We know as South Africans, we might take a bit longer to find, right? And I'm
Yeah.
talking from a state perspective. How do you change the mentality of people, and what's the vision moving forward?
I'll tell you this in a little story, and that is, I had a friend, and this friend had exactly the same view. You know, oh, never going to change. I love the sound of the V8, and I love this, and I love the smell of petrol. You know, and so I took him, and all I did was I put him behind the steering wheel of an electric vehicle, and he drove the car for 2 minutes, pulled it over to the side of the road, looked me in the eye, and he said, "Winston, I'm over it." I said, "You're over what?" He said, "Don't need the smell of fuel." He said, don't need the sound of the V8. I said, why? He said, well, all the years I thought that the noise was what gave me the speed and the power. And he said, now I realize in absolute silence, I have absolute big power. I have 100% torque at 0 RPM. I mean, this is what makes electric vehicles so amazing. You don't need to be at 3,000 RPM to get your peak torque. You can be at 0 RPM and you get peak torque immediately. So when you hit that accelerator, the vehicle is immediately responsive. You know, I'm not much of a 0 to 100 person, but you know what? I'm a 0 to 30 person. And you're not going to touch me on 0 to 30. So I don't even have to speed. I just like that initial out of the gate. And I think that's what people don't realize is that electric gives you that massively. And you realize that you don't need noise to have power. Yeah, range is still something we're dealing with. And that's part of why we put that power down and we get, you know, those charge points you spoke about. Every 200 kilometers on all the major highways, the N1, the N2, the N3, and the N4, there are charging stations. And that allows people to now look and say, I can drive to Cape Town. Yeah, it's going to take you an extra maybe 6 to 7 hours because you're going to be stopping and you're going to be charging at the charging stations. But take your time. Enjoy it. This is what it's about. And over time, the batteries will get better range. The chargers will get a bit quicker, not too much quicker, I don't think. But at the end of the day, we are going to see these technologies. It really is the way to go. But yeah, put a guy into an electric car and I promise you he's over it.
I see the network, you know, being quite well established around the country. We've got some, you know, Johannesburg, like I mentioned, in Kroonstad, close towards Nelspruit, Harrismith, even towards the side of Maseru. I'm sure that's maybe towards Vicksburg, perhaps, you know, going all the way down here. We're looking at Beaufort West. So there are a number of charge points, right? How's the market taken on so far? And what are some of the challenges? We know electricity sometimes is a problem in the country. This being solar powered, I'm sure obviously brings a different dynamic. But when it comes to the point about, you know, vandalism, looting, etc., things like that now, something I'd like to highlight is we see a lot of this happening where with the fiber cables, you know, they're going in the manholes, stealing the cables, burning it, whatever. How are you going to deal with this if there are, and have you had any incidents where things like this have happened?
So I think I found that generally people are respectful for the equipment. We're not seeing massive issues with any of the equipment across the country. I just want to touch on one thing you maybe glanced over because you were afraid that Eskom would come after you if you said too much about it. But a lot of people would say, yeah, but Eskom can't do this. Look at Eskom, we've got load shedding in the country. And I think what the easiest way to dispel this is that if we could overnight, let's say I had a magic wand, and I'm going to go dink, and tomorrow morning every single car in the country is going to be an electric vehicle. If Eskom had to step up to produce energy for all of those electric cars, they would only have to produce about 7%, about 9% more energy. So this is not a huge amount of energy, considering that we're going to take 15 to 20 years to get to that state. So it's really not a big number. A lot of people have the perception that if all cars were electric, Eskom would have to produce 10 times more energy. That's just not the case. So, but over and above that, most installations or many sites have solar. So one of the things we are finding is when we install in charging stations, often the sites would look and say, can you help us with solar as well? And absolutely, that's what we're there for. And we would do solar installations with the sites as well.
Talking about these installations and, you know, I want to highlight a bit about a global challenge because some concerns are that people have around electric cars is that where to charge them. What happens if I run out of battery or whatever the case is? And in places like China, the Netherlands, the US, fortunately, they have the high-end Tesla vehicles, right? South Africa, we might not be there yet, but there is access to supercharging network apparently in the US where they have access to around, or you can drive you for about 1,000 K. So that's Joburg to Durban on one charge. Am I correct in saying so, or how would that work?
Yeah, look, I mean, all of that just comes down to the battery size. So it comes down to what the battery is. And maybe just, again, in South Africa, we've got Jaguar I-Pace. That's pretty much the equivalent of a Tesla. We've got the new Taycan that is probably in excess of what the Teslas are, in terms of actual performance. Range-wise, Tesla probably still does lead a little bit, but they've just got very, very big batteries in the cars. The cars are really efficient. So what we're going to see, what we're not going to see is we're not going to see very fast chargers everywhere. And the reason for that is that requires a huge amount of power at a very single point in time. So, right now, the charging stations we've deployed between 60 and 80 kilowatt charging stations. So without trying to understand all the technology, 60 to 80, that's the number, the speed at which it charges. An 80 kilowatt charging station would fill a vehicle like a Jaguar or a Porsche Taycan in maybe an hour and a half. You'd get a full charge, or an 80% charge at the very least. So that gives you some idea of what that speed is. Vehicles like the Porsche are capable of charging, I think their top charging rate, probably 300 kilowatts. So we only provide 80, but they can go to 300. We will see some 300 kilowatt charging stations coming in. I have no doubt. But they're probably going to be a few years away just because they're a lot more expensive. They'd be 5 to 10 times the price of a 80 kilowatt charging station. So we really need a lot more customers that are ready to use those high-speed charging systems. When they talk in Tesla about the superchargers, they're actually 90 kilowatts. So just to put it in perspective, we do 80, they do a supercharger which is 90. There are charging stations across Europe now that are 350 kilowatts. So, supercharge, fast charge, ultra charge, there are 100 different names people use, but really they're all just DC fast chargers.
Looking at what needs to be done a bit more in South Africa, right? And then we'll touch a bit about the e-mobility service that you provide, etc. Many of these, electronic vehicle owners worry about the current charging network being very small, as I mentioned, right? The underlying issue being addressed before we consider the large-scale development of, infrastructure. More specific, right? Basically, the large network of these charge points will need reliable industrial strength, and you mentioned it from ESCOM. I want to touch on, the African continent and where you see South Africa as opposed to some other countries in Africa, because Africa is an emerging market when it comes to, in terms of, I think, all aspects of economy now. It was an untapped market. We see in China coming with a lot, the US, Europe, when it comes to products, services that they're offering to the continent at large. They're seeing a market that's untouched. Where is South Africa as opposed to other countries in Africa? I mean, the likes of Angola, maybe Egypt, or, being one of the most industrialized nations in the continent. How do we fare when it comes to this concept?
Yeah. So I think maybe just to be you said there's about 150 charging stations. There's probably about 250 in South Africa, if we count all the AC and DC and everything like that. Gridcars is by far the biggest owner of DC charging stations, so the fast chargers. But if we look across the board, BMW has invested hugely into charging stations. They've got about 80 on their own. Jaguar, same, similar type of numbers. Nissan is to a smaller degree invested in that, but the other groups like EV Crowdroot, they're also driving the deployment of charging infrastructure. So when you look at our map, often you will see those charging stations as well, not just ours. So it is a collective map of all the different sites available. Beyond South Africa, Zimbabwe has already installed a couple of fast chargers. We're busy working with a few companies up there around where that's going to be going. So I know the first cars have arrived in Zimbabwe, and we're looking and collaborating with the company that's rolling out in Zimbabwe. And part of that collaboration is to ensure that we've got a corridor that will run through South Africa, through Zimbabwe, and they've also got contacts up in Rwanda. So they want to do Zambia or Rwanda and move all the way up. So there's actually, it is the start of a rumor that we might see a trans-African highway over the next 5 to 8 years that'll take you all the way to Egypt on electric vehicle charging. Other countries that have stepped up quite strongly already, certainly the very northern countries that are close to Europe, you would see those, Morocco, sort of at the top of Africa,
Yeah.
Egypt, places like that. But we're also seeing charge points being deployed in Ethiopia, in Kenya. I think Siemens has been rolling out in Kenya. And we're in discussions with all of those because what we want is we want a single, let's call it a roaming network. So what will happen is, as those networks come online, our users would be able to use an active charge card to be able to charge at any of those charging stations as they move up through Africa. There's obviously some international currency things we're dealing with in terms of how the banks would do the exchanges on that, but the idea is to have a collaborative effort going through that. So we're working with quite a few African countries to ensure that they have the right start and that they put the right technology on the ground when they're working, right from the beginning.
Now, I want to talk about your journey, grid cars, etc. Obviously, you were established back in 2009. There was lots happening. South Africa was the place to be at the time. The build-up to 2010.
Still the place to be.
Still is, but there's a lot been happening. We leave the negatives out. Let's focus on, four-phase electricity. In September 2017, you listed on the JSE, the company Alviva. Take us through this journey and where is the company today currently?
Yeah, so it's been such an exciting journey. We actually started quite a bit earlier, around 2005, but we only really named the company and formed the company properly in 2009. And then from about 2012, we realized that while we were doing a lot, we were building vehicles and batteries and everything at that time, but it was really, I think we were scrounging to find money, and any opportunity we jump at it. Whereas, from 2012, we really started to realize that our future lay within the charging infrastructure and management services. So maintenance of charging infrastructure, billing systems, the building of that network and the mapping side of it, all of that, those intelligent IT systems. And in 2016, we met up with a company called SolarF, and the directors from SolarF looked at what we were, and they said, it was small. This is a little SMME that sort of doesn't have some, let's say, clear direction. We're still a little bit scattered and trying to do this and trying to do that. And they stepped in. They took a majority shareholding in the company. They are majority owned by Alviva. That gave us our status that effectively we sit under a listed company now. And really what happened was it really gave the company a lot of focus. And that focus was driven towards charging infrastructure and the services around that. And we abandoned all the peripheral projects that we were working on, which would have been batteries, vehicles, bicycles, you name it. If there was an opportunity, we were looking at it. And I think that focus really, really helped us as a company to be where we are today. And the commitment from SolarF and from Alviva, and the commitment that they had towards looking at this as a future technology, remembering that they're an IT services group, not necessarily a type group. This was something that was a little bit strange for them, but I think they really saw the value in aligning to where the future is going and understanding those technologies and being able to walk a path with us. And they certainly have. They've really helped us to structure the business right, to grow the business in such a way that we are really now batting at that league and batting at that level.
Now, you've mentioned the partnership with Jaguar and the variant, the I-Pace. The other competitors in the market, you spoke about the Porsche, the BMW. Let's talk about about some of the Japanese variants, maybe Nissan, with the Leaf, etc. In South Africa, what is the best-selling electric car at the moment, and where do you see the market gap between the different competitors in the electronic vehicle space?
Yeah. I think what's important in South Africa is to see cheaper vehicles coming to the country. And I don't mean cheap vehicles, I mean cheaper. So the best-selling vehicle at this stage would certainly be the BMW i3. And that I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but they really, they move in the most units by far. Vehicles like the I-Pace through Jaguar and the Porsche Taycan, and coming up very soon is going to be the e-tron and the vehicles from Mercedes-Benz, into the country, a lot of these are the premium vehicles, and that's just because the premium market is a little bit more easy to accept a vehicle that is 20 or 30% more expensive than a traditional vehicle at that stage, or that level. So I think as I said, what we do need is the lower end pricing coming in. Exciting vehicle coming into the market, again, the top brand, and that's VW. They will probably come in, I certainly believe, below the i3 prices are from BMW, but also Mini is coming in towards the end of this year, and the Mini will also be under sort of, it'll wrap with the BMW, but it will certainly be vehicles below the BMW pricing as well. And I think that's exciting because that is going to start to make the vehicles more accessible in the market that people can go. What we as a company, we work with all of the OEMs. So we're not in any direct partnership. We've secured contracts with certain companies. So we've got a contract with Jaguar to support their dealership and to roll out certain things. And they've got a contract with us to do branding of charge points. So we've got a branding agreement, and that brands a very high number of charge points across the network. That's why you're very likely, if you bump into one of our chargers, to find that it's got a Jaguar brand on it. But that said, we also work very closely with BMW and their dealers and supporting of their customer base. We've certainly been working very closely over the last couple of weeks with Porsche as they've been rolling out the first demo vehicles to customers and starting to take the first orders. And we've had lots of discussions with Audi, VW, and other groups as well, Volvo, and in terms of how we can support them. Because remember, as Grid Cars, our job is really to create a conducive environment for the OEMs to be able to bring product into the market. I suppose you can see it like the people who built roads at the time when there weren't roads when the first car started. You really want to work with all the guys building cars. You don't want to say this road is only for that car. It's really a generic platform and a generic highway, and that's exactly what we've done. And I think all the OEMs see that. So even, if you look at the networks rolled out by Jaguar and by BMW, both of them see that this network has got to be a generic. It's not a Jaguar-only network. It doesn't say only Jaguar can charge here. Jaguar might be the branding partner, but anybody can charge on it. Whereas same thing with BMW. They roll out a brand called Charge Now, and the Charge Now network, anybody can charge on it. It's not just a BMW that will charge there. And I think that's where we've seen that technology go. And then obviously we're a little bit more agnostic. So some of our charging stations would carry a neutral branding or a Grid Cars branding or, a bank or something like that, not necessarily an OEM's branding.
Winston, it's been great having you tonight, man. Thank you for taking the time. Lots of talking points, but there's still so much to talk about, but the time obviously doesn't permit. For the viewers and listeners who'd like to get in touch, you can go onto the website, gridcars.net, and check it out, guys. It's really interesting. Winston, thank you so much. The MD at Grid Cars, thank you so much for the time. And one day, hopefully, with the Corona lockdown eases off a bit, you can have me in the studio and maybe go for a test run. What you say? That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. We'll organize a couple of test drives for you with any cars. I'm sure we can talk to all of the people. But thank you for your time as well. It's wonderful chatting, and hopefully we can come back and fill in some more of the gaps once we see what the people are asking and consolidate some of those questions. We'd love to do that.
Awesome stuff. Have a great weekend, Winston. Take care.
You too. Thank you so much.
Yeah.